I'm Erin Brown.
And I'm Negar Fanuni.
And we are nasty women because we believe that we deserve to seek pleasure just for the sake of it. Today we're going to talk about sex. So ever since we decided yesterday that that's what we're going to talk about today, I've had that song in my head. Let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Right?
You know that speaking of which, because that song came out when we were kids.
Yeah.
There are so many songs that we used to sing along to when we were kids that we had no idea they were about sex.
I Want to Sex You Up. Was that a jam of yours?
It actually says sex in it. And we were just totally inappropriately 10 years old, and Push It. Push It was the big one.
Push It.
My sister and I had a dance routine that we created.
Do you know it still?
Of course I still know it.
Can you teach it to me? Can we do that together?
It's very simple. It's a lot of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, because you do the actions.
This kind of stuff, yeah. And we had no idea that the song was about sex. And at no point were my parents we did a whole dance recital. And at no point were my parents I don't know
what that song's about. My big dance routine that we went places with, I was a dancer, but performed in front of parents, was to Opposites Attract, the
Paula Abdul
song. And I wore white jean shorts rolled up with a black shirt, and my friend wore black jean shorts with a white shirt. She was Paula, I was the cat. So I got to do the rap part.
Oh, the cat. Why did you think it was a rabbit? I was thinking of Roger Rabbit. Because that was also cartoon and yeah.
The cat. My job is always the rap part. I mean, obviously.
Anyway, we're talking about that.
It's going really well.
It is going really well. And we just want to have a really candid conversation about sex. I think that a lot of women are either having these conversations with their friends or want to feel more open having these conversations with their friends. I have friends with whom, present company, I can really talk very candidly about sex. Mm-hmm. And other friends, specifically friends that I've been friends with since I was a kid, with whom I don't really have those conversations.
Yeah. And
have lately been kind of trying to throw those in just very surreptitiously. So what do you think about anal? No.
It is shocking to me that you would discuss that with people.
Yeah. I would never.
That's a joke because she does that all the time.
It's like a first date conversation.
It really is.
But I have been kind of more consciously trying to have those conversations. And so I think this is a really great thing to talk about. And we are going to touch on a lot of different aspects of just a general sexual conversation. Mm-hmm. But we also want you to keep in mind that whatever your sexuality or your sexual identification, as you listen to the show, we are going to say things that are specifically related to heterosexual sex and things that are, sexually fluid or can be, applicable to homosexual relationships and so on and so forth. For example, when we talk about penis and vagina,
for example.
Yes, just because that is, the type of sex that Erin and I typically have, but it is not an exclusive conversation about penis and vagina.
No, we're talking about our experiences, and Nagar and I fully affirm any and every kind of sex that you consensually have with somebody who's so excited to do it with you.
Emphasis on the consensual.
Totally consensual. We're today talking about consensual sex only.
Over. This is Nasty Women Radio, and we're discussing consensual sex,
which is the hottest kind. It's the only hottest kind. It's the
only
thing
good
that's
kind.
Really missing from the conversation about consent, where it's really it's mandatory, and it's such an important conversation. But the thing that's always missing from me is I'm it's the kind that's fucking fun.
is.
Like outside of the obvious like trauma and things that come from it not being consensual, if you want to have a good time, you want to be with somebody who's like, yeah, like bend me over. Let's.
I want this.
Yeah, I'm participating fully.
You know, do you watch? I don't know if you watch Westworld, but John and I have been watching Westworld, and it's far off in the future in this imaginary situation where there are androids that are very advanced androids, right? Okay. They look like you and me. And in the show, a lot of the characters go to this world, this like Western, like, you know, it's like the Old West. And one of the things that these visitors to this place do is like have sex with the androids. And it's just like a thing, like people come to this park to like kill people and have sex with people and like do all these things because they're androids, because they're not real people, right? So it's like you can live out your fantasies with these robots and there are no consequences because they're not real people. And John and I were talking about it, and I was like, you know, would you want to, like, if we went to this park, like, you know, totally hypothetical because it's not a real thing, but like if we went to Westworld, for example, would you want to have sex with one of these androids? And he was like, I would, like, no, because they can't consent. Yeah, no. He was like, I have like that. He's like, I don't even think I could get into it because it's not like it's not like they don't want it.
Right.
They're just they're programmed.
I am just like so glad that that's where this was going, because I was like, holy, what are you talking about? Because it was feeling icky for that reason. I was just talking to a girlfriend this morning, sort of like doing some crowdsourcing and thinking about the kinds of things that people get hung up about around sex. And one of the things that she said that I thought was really interesting is that, particularly for girls, and this is something that I hope that we really move away from, there's this sacredness put around virginity, but that's not as though it's hers. You know what I mean? Like it's your father's to protect, or it's hers to like hold on to because there's something dirty about giving it away, or what. It's like all of this weird stuff where like sex can be very sacred. And if you want to have, you know, a beautiful sexual experience, especially for your first time or any time, you can consider that sacred. But the way that we treat girls' virginity is though it's not their own to determine. Yeah.
It's your future husband's, your future spouse. Yeah.
Yeah. And somehow in weird, the way we talk about it, like it belongs to your dad. It's all fucked.
I don't like it.
And so there's this like idea of maintaining purity. And then my friend that I was talking to is married, and she's like, you know, even if that's not something that I agree to, it's something that's part of my consciousness and thinking about how I was sharing myself with others, and there's this idea that there's something wrong with it unless you're married. But then here's the deal, you get married, and how do you change that switch? Like my whole life has been about protecting this thing about me that's sacred, and now I'm supposed to have wild fun times and completely change my thinking about what I'm allowed to do with my vagina and the rest of my body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's certainly a lot of built up psychology behind that. And a lot of like this idea of the societal construct that somehow society gets to decide what is appropriate for us to do with our own bodies. That, you know, somehow this society that we've been born to and the years of patriarchal influence can affect how we experience pleasure within our own bodies.
Within our own homes.
Yeah.
Come on. That should feel really freeing. And there's still like some stuff to remove to get to a comfortable place with that. Mm-hmm. One of the things that when I was talking to my friends about this, just sort of thinking about the kinds of things that we had to undo ourselves, one of them was this idea that that there is a goal, and if you don't hit the goal, it's not a thing. So like if your partner doesn't climax, or if you don't climax first, and there's like an idea about who needs to go first and holding out for each, like that there's some method that's perfect, and if you don't get that, then it's a failure. And I think there's pressure equally on men and women to make that happen. And so that was one of the things for me as an adult, figuring out how how I like to experience sex is that there can be really great sex had without the pressure on that. I was reading, I don't know if it was in Cosmo or somewhere, and it was like 5 things.
Some reputable
news
source.
But it's one of those headlines like 5 things men don't want you to know about sex, or secrets, or whatever, grabbing. And one of them that was actually surprising to me was how many men had faked orgasm with a female partner.
Wow.
Because of that idea, because we feel like we failed. And the truth is, like, sometimes you're just not going to get there, and that doesn't mean that you don't have a hell of a time enjoying it.
And I'm glad that you brought that up, because it's certainly not a gender specific issue. It's certainly like, this is an issue that all genders experience when it comes to, their sexual, engagement. There is this idea, this construct that, sex has a goal. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that, like, it's deep buried in our, like, lizard brain that the purpose for sex is, procreation. And so, of course, a man has to have an orgasm because we don't procreate without that. So I think that that's somewhere, like, deeply layered. But it's also, this pressure to, like, to climax. And if you don't climax, then your partner feels as though they've done something wrong, right? How many times have you had a sexual experience and one of you hasn't climaxed and the other person has been like, is everything okay?
Right.
Is something wrong? Yeah, I'm sorry. And it's something that we can choose within ourselves and also with our partners to shed that pressure, because for one thing, psychosomatically, when that pressure is there, it's harder to climax. And I know specifically for women, because ours is a little bit more complex, that, anytime I feel like this pressure to, like, I feel like it's gonna happen, it's about to happen, and then I focus on that, then I lose it.
Yeah, because it requires that you relax and be really present. And if your head is in, I better.
Yeah.
That's hard.
If I don't, I'm letting my partner down, or what's the point of having the sex? It's wasted sex. Like, I don't think there's any such thing as wasted sex.
No. And there's something to me that's kind of hot about not. In fact, there's a whole practice, I think it's called edging, where people just, like, get really close and don't climax on purpose. I can't speak to this. That. I'm sure we could get a guest to speak about edging.
Yeah.
But there's something hot about, like, not completing, because when you're completing, then it's, I don't know, at least for me, I'm usually just wiped out. It's a rare occasion that I'm like, 3 more. Like, that's not normal for me. I'm like, whew, I'm gonna take a nap.
Yeah.
So there's something that, like, that's lingering about the experience if it doesn't climax, which is hot. Like, that's cool too.
Yeah. And we need to start having these conversations to reflect the fact that there's no shame or stigma in not climaxing during a sexual experience, and that the sexual experience itself, and I think that it's like, you can think about it in sort of like a meditative or like a mindful way, right? Yeah. Like, what we're doing right now, this is the thing. Yeah. This is the thing we're doing. And it's this moment, and it's whatever's happening in this moment. And there doesn't have to be an end goal to it, because then there's this pressure of, like, we have to reach this goal.
Yeah.
It's like, you can go to the gym and work out every day, and it doesn't have to be to lose 50 pounds. It can just be because you're at the gym and you enjoy moving your body and lifting heavy things, you know? Yes.
And enjoying the journey.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of, I think that your journeys are perhaps more adventurous.
Maybe not. For a long time, I started having sex at a young age. I was 15 when I lost my virginity. Okay. But interestingly enough, I was the last of my friends within my immediate friend group to lose my virginity.
Were you like the prude then, because you hadn't yet?
Not on purpose, but like
I was too, and I was 16. But I would we had real quick. We had at my school, in the like high school newspaper, you could write like love notes to your friends for like 5 cents a word on Valentine's Day. And I had planned to lose my virginity to my longtime boyfriend when I was 16, and so my friends took out an ad in the paper.
Oh my God.
wrote this like cryptic message about like finally joining the ranks or whatever. I was the total prude.
And isn't it so interesting, and especially now as a parent, to think about, being 15 or 16 and being considered a prude for not having yet had sex?
Oh my gosh.
Like, it's so crazy. So I'd been dating a guy that I'd known since the first grade. He was my first boyfriend, and he, ultimately became the first person who I had sex with, but we only had sex like twice ever. Oh. And the first time we did it was in a pool, which is the worst possible first sex experience.
Oh my gosh.
Pool, I don't care what anybody says. Pool or jacuzzi sex, water sex. Water sex doesn't do it for me.
Hot for touching, challenging for lubrication.
No. Maybe it does it for you. I don't know. I don't even like to do it in the shower. I'm just like...
Oh, I do.
It's too... maybe because when you have kids, like, that's the only place you have privacy is when you're in the shower. But it just, like, for me, I'm just like, I don't want to be, like, wet while things are happening.
But that kind of wet.
Yeah, not that kind of wet. So, yeah, we had sex in a pool, which was stupid, but that was what happened. No. And it was uncomfortable, and it was like, like most first sexual experiences are. And I bled a little bit, and it's so interesting because I think a lot of people don't know this. I only recently read about this when I read Come As You Are, and I think we spoke about this on our masturbation episode. Not all women have hymens. Like, the hymen isn't like a thing that every woman has that like breaks when you are no longer a virgin. It's not something that evolution is selected for. And so a lot of women don't actually have one. And many women, when it's broken, doesn't even have to do with sex. Can be like any other,
that's like horseback riding. Like, we're all fucking riding horses.
Yeah. Who's riding a horse? I grew up in fucking LA. Like, that's not a thing that happens. But, you don't necessarily even have one. It can break in any possible way. And majority of the time when a woman bleeds during her initial sexual experiences, it's not because of the hymen breaking. It's because there's not enough lubrication or because it's actual like abrasions to the vaginal wall. Yeah. So that's just a little tidbit of medical information for you. But I bled a little bit, and it was really uncomfortable. And it planted this seed in me very early on that sex was a thing that I had to pretend to like. That, was just like to do it because everybody else was doing it was kind of like a big thing. I didn't have an orgasm. So I started having sex when I was 15. I didn't have an orgasm until I was 19. So I had just been having sex without orgasms for 4 years, thinking that this is as good as it gets. And then I, started dating this new guy when I was 19 and had an orgasm. And I was just like, what the actual fuck? Like, this is,
there it is.
This is what I've been missing. And I've just been a slut ever since. I'll just tell you.
I love it. I know this is hard to think about, but it's something I've thought quite a bit about. When you look back at your sexual experiences prior to orgasm, was it fun? Were you ever enjoying yourself?
Yes. There were certainly times where I did, and I'm not ashamed to say this, there were certainly times where I did have sex because I was like, this is just what I'm supposed to do. Right.
Same.
And that was, obviously I was, my self-worth was compromised and there were some other things going on there, but there were several times where, I had a high school boyfriend, from like, we dated all of senior year. And there were several times that we had just had like super fun backseat experiences and all these different things that never resulted in me climaxing, but were always like very enjoyable despite not having had an orgasm. So I was never stressed out about it. I was never like, oh my God, I haven't had an orgasm yet. It wasn't until the point where I actually did have an orgasm that I awoke to the fact that I hadn't. Yeah,
same. My first sexual experiences were not consensual and awful. But to the topic of consensual sex, the guy that I consider having lost my virginity to, because for me that was sacred and something that I wanted to share with somebody. So I don't believe that's something somebody could take from me. But it was my high school boyfriend, and he was a senior, and I was a sophomore. And he was the sweetest guy. Like, he walked me home from school every day in junior high, even though I wouldn't date him because I was such an asshole. He gave my mom flowers on Mother's Day. Like, he was just the most thoughtful. I was not an adventurous eater in high school. This is so embarrassing. My favorite food was chicken fingers and French fries with ranch from Applebee's. What?
I'll eat that today.
I mean, I probably would not. I would have a big ass salad from Applebee's. But he would bring that to me at lunch during school. And he went to a different high school. Anyway, he was just a really great guy, and he was also a virgin. So our first time was together. And I remember it's hard to remember what the actual sexual experience was like, because the context was that it was all so new. But if I could just like try to conceptualize what happened in the room, I'm sure that it was not long. Yeah. There was not a whole lot to it. But I remember that we did it, and then we both just like laid next to each other, like paralyzed in the bed, like, we did it. And it was perfect. And we dated for about a year and really had fun, you know, and we'd talked a lot. We communicated a lot about like what we wanted to try and had a lot of fun trying things together. High school boyfriend, I don't think that I ever had an orgasm with him, but I also didn't know, I wasn't missing anything. I was having a great time. It wasn't until I started giving myself orgasms that I was able to do that with a partner. But it was so much fun. And I really, as much as I still do have some dysfunction around sex that I'm working through as a result of my history, I really do think that having such a positive experience with him laid the groundwork for me to be able to have any sort of healthy sexual expression sense, which I am so appreciative of.
Absolutely. So yeah, you don't have to have an orgasm. Let's take away that insecurity. Let's start unveiling that. Let's, get into these situations with our sexual partners, consensual sexual partners of choice, and like let go of this pressure to climax. We don't have to finish. We can just do the thing and enjoy the thing. And speaking of orgasms, for women, Erin and I have talked about this privately, but there are several ways that a woman can orgasm, and you don't always necessarily have, one type of orgasm. I would say from everything that I've read and all the women that I've spoken to, the most common type is a clitoral orgasm. Direct clitoral stimulation is what works for most women, or I should say that's like the most foolproof. Right? Like if I stimulate this, then something's going to happen, right? Like there's a button. You know what to look for. But surprisingly, it's not always the most pleasurable way for a woman to orgasm.
Okay, I need you to tell me more about that.
So there are vaginal orgasms. There are even uterine orgasms. So it really just depends on like the position and the type of stimulation. So while I do have clitoral orgasms, it's not what I enjoy the most. So like if you've ever had an orgasm that felt like it was like coming from like deep inside, I didn't mean to say coming, but
yeah, you did.
I'm glad that I did. But it's emanating from somewhere like more visceral, somewhere like deeper inside of you. That's not just like a spiritual experience. That's an actual physical experience. Like it could possibly be that you are having a vaginal orgasm or a uterine orgasm. So
I have questions.
Okay. Well, I'm not an expert.
Dr. Nagar. Well, I'm not sure if I've had orgasms outside of clitoral orgasms. So, but I have had the experience of it feeling like it was deeper, but it's always come from direct or indirect clitoral stimulation. So to have those other kinds of orgasms, does it have to come from stimulation of that space?
I think so. And I think that it's probably not mutually exclusive.
Okay.
There's probably like a combo situation.
Okay.
Going on most of the time.
Because the quick, when on the masturbation podcast, I talk about 2 minutes. That's a whoop, done.
Yeah, you know exactly what to do. It's a step-by-step process.
Yeah, and it's real easy. So then there's been the other kind that feels like it lasts longer, the pulse feels deeper. So that's a different kind.
Yeah, that's a different kind.
So I have had more than one kind of orgasm.
You have had more than one kind.
I feel like I should celebrate.
Well, that's why they don't all feel the same, right? Like they do. Congratulations, Aaron.
Thank you. This is a special day.
And again, if you feel like there's always clitoral stimulation, then it's probably like a combo situation. Personally, I cannot orgasm from clitoral stimulation alone.
Yeah.
I have to have some kind of insertion. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it doesn't happen for me. So I would posit that I have like more vaginal orgasms than I do clitoral.
Either.
Says
me.
Either or either. Yeah. So I would posit that I probably have more of those types of orgasms than clitoral orgasms. But the reason I mention this is that there are different ways you can explore climax in and of itself. And it doesn't mean that you need to like go out and seek these different types of things, but that what works for you to climax might not necessarily work for another person. And so it's really important, I think. And I think a big part of what we talked about when we did our masturbation episode is that the way that you can get the most out of being with a partner is knowing what you like, what you enjoy, how you climax, and then, obviously those things aren't, they aren't rigid. Like those things are going to grow and change as you grow as a sexual being. Like I used to only orgasm on top. That was like the only way I would orgasm, and it was a very specific thing, and I would bring myself to orgasm. So basically I was masturbating with a partner. Like it's essentially what.
I'm sure they didn't hate it.
No, they didn't. But for me, it was like, this is a specific thing that I know I need to do, and this is the way it happens. And then you explore and you realize, I can actually get to climax in all these myriad ways.
Right. Yeah, I feel like I learned a lot about other people's preferences when I was with somebody who had been with somebody else for a long time.
Yeah.
Because like the initial time you get her preferences. You get when you've been with a partner for a long time, you sort of know, what works for them, what and so you have like a routine that goes all over the place. But
you have a set of moves.
Yeah, you know where the buttons are. You do it differently, but you know right where the buttons are. And so I would get like the ex-girlfriend's buttons, and it's like, that's interesting. We're gonna work some different buttons, or work the same buttons in a totally different way.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. So, and I know that you mentioned, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I know in some of our conversations you've talked about just like generally enjoying more conservative missionary style of sexual engagement. And I get pleasantly teased a lot by you and by others about, just being a little bit more exploratory. And I think that a lot of that has to do with your personal experiences with partners.
Yeah.
And, what type of communication you have with your partner and how you choose to go about that. And while missionary is my absolute favorite, even anal missionary, and we'll talk about that when we go in depth. We're going to do a whole, we're not going to talk about anal today because anal deserves its own space.
Yeah. It
deserves an entire episode, dedicated to itself.
I'm gonna defer to you on that one, and it's gonna be great.
But, I love missionary. That's my jam. It's my favorite thing. It's always like our fallback. It's where, my husband and I feel the most connected. But we do like to try lots of different things. And sometimes it's like one of us wants something and the other is like, okay, let me backtrack. We decided very early on in our relationship that it was always okay to ask for something.
Oh, that's good.
That you would never be judged, that you would never be made to feel weird or shameful for something that you wanted, that it would always be considered.
Okay.
but that the other person had a right and to say like, I don't think I'm really,
Yeah.
I'm not, that's where I draw the line.
That
Like
one's a no.
you're okay for wanting that.
Yes.
I don't want to do that.
Yes.
And so we have that explicit conversation and communication and understanding in our marriage. So there have been things, that John's wanted, and I've been like, I don't know if I like that, but I'll try it. And sometimes I'm like, this is great. And other times I'm like, no, thank you. And there have been things that, that he's asked for that I've just been like, nope. And vice versa. So, there's certain things where we know, okay, well, that's where the line is. But we always ask and we talk a lot about it. We talk a lot about sex in general and our sex.
Yeah. I guess you sort of alluded to that, but do you talk about fantasies? Like, is a fantasy always on the table, or do you ever talk about fantasies that you just have? It's always on the table?
It's always something that was open for discussion.
Yeah.
And it's always like, okay, well, can I talk about this? This is something I might want, and it will always be considered. But I think there are other fantasies that are just fantasies, that they're not necessarily things that you want to play out, that they're things that you just want to have for yourself.
Oh, you keep them.
Yeah.
I have some of those.
They're just for you.
Just for me and inside my head. Yeah, so that's one of the things, especially as a young person, figuring out what my values were about sex and, who and when and how much is too much. And I think for a long time, like my appearance, my sexual performance was something that I thought is where my value was.
Yes.
And particularly as someone who is very insecure about their appearance, it was like, this is terrible and honest at once. It was like, this is something I know I have to offer. As like I don't know, like a contingency prize for not getting the beautiful one. That's so sad, but it's true.
I don't think you're alone in that feeling. I think that many of us have felt that way, that this is a thing that I have to offer, and we lead. We've grown and learned to lead with our sexuality because that's what we felt we had to offer.
Yeah, and there's a totally different presence in somebody who embodies their sexuality, and it's just like, oh, well, hello, you who walked into the room. And somebody who does so because they don't know that they're worthy, which was something that I did. It was like a way that I proved myself, I don't have that, but I have this. So coming along with that was this idea that like I needed to have like this like bag of tricks, and so like that's where it's different now being in a relationship that I've been in for 10 years and we have a monogamous relationship. Where there used to be a lot more adventure. I mean, I don't know how much my husband wants me to share about our sex lives, but for example, when we were younger, we definitely were more adventurous in terms of where we had sex. And we've had sex in public. And now that's like, it's kind of hot to think about and also totally unappealing because we have this amazing bed.
Right.
With like all of our favorite like sheets and there's like, it works out really. So it's become more conservative for me because I'm more comfortable with what I like. And I do love missionary. My favorite though is to be on top.
Yeah.
What do you call, is that girl on top? Why isn't that missionary? Why isn't it only missionary when man's on top?
Can we talk about the patriarchy of sexual descriptors?
Because when I think missionary, I think either way, but it's just, it's face to face and someone's on top.
So I guess they're both missionary. We're going to decide that that's what it is.
Yes.
From now on.
It's all missionary.
It's all missionary.
Face to face.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my brain went someplace interesting, and I'm gonna head there with it. Something that I've noticed amongst my friends and present company included, I roll with super powerful women, and a lot of the powerful women I know really like an element of being dominated totally within their consent. Which in my like constant analytical brain, I wonder if there's something to like wanting to be handled differently in the bedroom than you are in the world,
I think that's certainly possible. I mean, I self-identify as a very powerful woman, very
You
firmly
are.
rooted in my worth. Thank you.
Hmm.
Very firmly rooted in my worth. I don't question my worth or my value or my power as a woman. But I am not interested in dominating my partner. And I do very much like consensual being dominant, submission, being dominated.
Yeah.
Do I speak English? Am I a person who speaks English and writes for a living? Maybe, maybe not.
Who knows?
Yeah, I do enjoy consensual submission.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's something totally different between someone believing they have power over you and handing someone the keys with trust. You know? And so that's, I don't know, that's something that I really get a kick out of. And I'm not surprised that like a lot of my female friends are similar in that way.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, hypothesis.
Yeah.
But hey, but also let's be clear that if you are someone who does enjoy a female who enjoys dominating a male or a female partner, that doesn't make you not powerful elsewhere.
It's all good.
So
it's all good.
They're not mutually exclusive. So yeah, whatever you like. I think what I really would like to say in terms of the topic of sex, and I know that we want to talk a little bit about some other things, including sexual frequency, and the whole sort of like how often am I supposed to be having sex? What's normal, as well as like how do you have sex when you have kids all of a sudden? But yeah, but if I could impart one thing with regards to this whole conversation about sex, it would be that in the context of consensual sex, like nothing is weird.
No.
Nothing is shameful. It's not weird to like missionary and want a more conservative or more, comfortable way of doing things. Like I would rather sit at home and watch Netflix and drink a bottle of wine than go out and party. I've done the partying. I decided I don't like it anymore. So this is where I'm at. And if that makes me a, conservative then, or boring, or whatever the case may be, like I'll take it because that's what I like. So if you like, things that are considered more conservative, fine. If you want somebody to spit in your mouth, that's cool too. Like as long as it's consensual and you're communicating, like never feel shame about the things that you want in the bedroom and in a sexual context, because we're all different and we all like different things.
Yeah. And if you're with somebody that thinks something that you want is weird, know that you just haven't found that person that wants to get that specific kind of weird with you. Because the alternative to you're not weird is we're all weird. And I think both are.
I like that one better.
Both because I'm a weirdo.
I'm weird, but I say that like in our house, and even like Isaac knows as my 10-year-old son. Sometimes I'm like, Isaac, you're such a weirdo, and he says thank you, because it's common knowledge in our home that weird is a compliment. Yeah.
It means to me. It means that you are, being your authentic self, and no two of us are, we're freaking special snowflakes.
Yeah, but there's no shame.
Shame.
Let's take the shame. Let's take the stigma out of it. It's okay to want things that you might not have been raised to think are, normal or acceptable. Like all kinds of sex, as long as they're consensual, are wonderful types of sex and sexual expression.
Yeah. Oh. Beautiful. So on the topic of frequency, I know, so we're both married, and I have a lot of friends who are married, and something that I feel like is unspoken and happening in a lot of marriages is concern from one or both parties that they're not having sex enough. Yeah. There's an idea that, from the life that we live, where we look at other people's lives on Instagram all the time, that everybody else's marriage is perfect, which is a whole nother episode. But specific to sex, that like, you and John must be having sex every night. So me and Jamal are getting it wrong. Like there's this whole thing, and failure. Yeah. And it, with all kinds of reasons. There's both that like, once you're in a committed relationship, keeping that like thing alive is a thing to nurture. There's, if you have kids or even just jobs and bills, that like stuff gets in the way of just like loosening up and being together. And all of that is its own work to keep healthy and communicate about what's healthy for both parties. But when there's like shame around it or the thought that you're failing, it makes it all the harder, just as feeling pressure to have an orgasm makes it harder to get there, right?
Absolutely.
So I think what's normal is just about everything under the sun. And in terms of frequency, and the most important thing is to find, even though this has been the hardest thing for me, is learning how to communicate with my husband about those things and not feel badly about it, or like maybe I'm not measuring up and I shouldn't ask. You know what I mean? Like it's uncovering the part that's shameful so that it can just be a part of a healthy dialogue about what's good for both of us and figuring out where that middle is.
Absolutely. And I think that that's the main point, is that this open communication without shame. And anytime we're communicating about something, we're actively bringing it out of shame, right? Because shame can only, Brene Brown always says, shame can only survive secrecy and silence. So if we're talking about something, we're engaging in the act of, deciding that we're not going to allow ourselves to feel shamed about this. As scary as that can feel. Vulnerability is a scary thing. But it is the antidote to shame. So if we're having these conversations, I think that's the most important thing. Like speaking to your partner about frequency, like what's normal in a marriage. What's normal in a marriage is what that couple decides is their preferred frequency, based on their preferences, based on their needs, based on their libidos, based on their schedules, based on their energy levels, their hormones. Like there are so many elements that come into play when it comes to frequency in a relationship alone, let alone, frequency when it comes to having multiple partners. So there's so many elements that come into play that I think that it's impossible to say, like, this is the normal frequency. Like, where are those metrics?
Right.
Like, who's deciding, like, who's collecting that data and saying, like, it's like, well, they have X amount of kids minus X amount of work hours multiplied by financial stress, subtract 5 for fucking, I don't know what the fuck. Like there's no, yeah, exactly. Like you can't create a numerical value for this because it's impossible, right? So I think that as long as you're having that open communication and saying, hey, I feel like maybe I'd like to have sex more often, or hey, is there a reason why? Do you think there's a reason why we're not having sex as much as we used to, or would you like to have more sex? Just these open conversations. Personally, in my marriage, there are weeks where we have sex all the time, and then weeks where we're stressed the fuck out, where one of us is sick or one of us is tired or one of us is traveling, and we might go several weeks and not have sex. And both of those are totally acceptable in our relationship.
Yeah. Well, and for me, and I, my marriage is one of the few things that are sacred that I don't like strewn about in public. I know that's the same for you. But I do feel comfortable talking about my end and my learning process. And so something for me, especially in terms of frequency, that changed in a really big way is when I let go of shame around thinking that I wasn't giving him sex enough.
Yeah.
There's that idea.
That's a huge one I think that women really deal with a lot, is like like we're giving it as opposed to like we're mutually experiencing this.
Yeah. Well, that's a conditioned thing, right? So that's something I didn't even realize I was doing. And so then there would be like resentment from me. Like, I don't owe you shit. And then shame from me. Like maybe I'm not measuring up as a wife. And, when I let that go, then I was able to come back to my partner with a completely different set of parameters that said, what would be good for me? What would be good for him? Yeah. When do I want to feel pleasured? When do I want to like pleasure my man? So I was thinking of it in terms of both my pleasure and his, and not just what I consent to or what I give to him, which was an extremely huge shift in our marriage, and that had to do with my undoing some of my conditioning around it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's a really important point in that our personal experience, our individual experience of sex and our ability to enjoy sex and to experience pleasure very often is going to be dependent on our undoing and unpacking of things that we've been predisposed to believe, of old narratives that are no longer serving us or maybe never did in the first place. And in many situations, I know yours included, you've spoken very publicly about, experiencing sexual trauma. And there's a lot of unpacking and undoing that we realize as we become adults that needs to happen in order for us to really freely experience sex.
Yeah, because pleasure is not something that goes in a neat little box.
No.
And we have so many boxes around this, and I'm sure that men have a different set of boxes, and I could probably even speak to it, but I'm talking about woman stuff today.
Well, you're not going to you don't want to woman-splain penises,
no, I'm
right?
not going to woman-explain shit. I'm going to talk about being a woman. We need to talk about this. But it's not shocking that we show up with some baggage when we're told, like, to keep a dime between our knees so we're pure for our husbands or no one will want us, but also don't be a prude, don't be a tease for, like, existing without offering sex to someone, that it's dirty and shameful, that you should be, I hate this, a lady in the streets but a freak in the sheets. I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, I am one person all the time. You don't get to see every single part of that, but I'm not one person out there and another, like,
no.
all of those
that's
things.
that's just another social construct. That's like, to me, that's like the equivalent of like strong is the new skinny. Like, yes. No, that sucks too.
Yeah,
like,
it's the Virgin Madonna thing. You're supposed to be experienced and, good, like skilled, but also not enough experience that like somebody won't want. It's all screwed up. So we show up with this baggage that in order to like have like unadulterated, like friggin' just like, this is how I like to be touched and it's good, you have to unpack a bunch of shit. And sometimes you have to do it like on the spot, which is hard. Like, oh, there's my
that
shit.
If you've ever had a sexual experience where like stuff has come up for you, or you've had like a freak out moment, or you've like cried or felt uncomfortable, like all these different things, like all of that is normal.
Yeah.
All of that is normal.
Well, I think that this is big and small. I think that most of our baggage happens within the context of relationship. And so most of our healing of that baggage comes within the context of relationship. And particularly when it comes to partnering, it's like we just show up with our bags. Yeah. And then it looks like really tidy. And then we throw all of our shit around. Yeah. And then we're like, okay, there's your shit. There's my shit.
How do we make it all?
How do we sort this out together? Yeah.
What parts are going to Goodwill?
Yeah.
Which ones are for the garage sale?
Which ones do we need to talk about together, and which ones do really just belong to ourselves? What parts of my shit did I throw at my husband and pretend were his? Like it's a lot. It's a lot to look at, which is why one thing that I think people don't talk about within the context of long-term relationships, be they married or not, is that there's all of that stuff for everybody, and none of it's peachy if you're having something, with a kind of like raw intimacy that I, of course, crave. It comes with tough spots, including weeks without sex that if you're communicating about it are okay and your relationship sustains it, because there shouldn't be any one place that the value of your relationship is put.
Absolutely. I agree. So I know that we wanted to discuss a little bit about different types of sexual experiences and sexual experimentation, and this concept of like of where you lie on the Kinsey scale, and your sort of sexual identification. And Erin and I discussed this prior to recording the episode, in that I identify as like 100% heterosexual, but I actually think I'm in the minority there.
Yeah.
I think that most people, they kind of vary on the scale, and I'm just like 100% hetero. Like I have kissed women, girls, I should say, because I was in high school. And I did that whole, like, you know, lesbian experience thing because it was like what girls were expected to do in my social circle.
Like for the male gaze? For people to watch, or was it private?
No, well, it was all of that.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah.
Yes.
But you know, there is this. I think that there is this kind of this like unspoken sort of thing that I think actually a lot of men would come out and say, like, actually that's not even really what we want. But there's this like societal construct, and a lot of this is perpetuated by porn, that men specifically want to watch two women get it on or multiple women get it on, and I think that that is a preference for some people. But I kind of just ended up in this sort of thought process of like, oh, that's just a thing that guys like. And it's a thing that some guys like, but it's not a thing that all guys like. And should I be doing something just because a guy likes it? Shouldn't I like it too? And so this is again, all the unpacking.
Right.
But so I did do a little bit of that, like kind of messing around with girls because it was what was expected. And also because I think on some subconscious level, I was like, maybe I should do this just to see if I like it. Because I was never like, ew, gross, I don't want to kiss girls, but I was also like, I don't feel super attracted to that, but I'm also not opposed to it, so let's check it out. And it wasn't until it got to like the vagina situation that I was like, I'm out. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. We can kiss and that's fine and this is all good, but like I'm not gonna do the whole I don't even know what to do with that. And I have one.
Yeah.
So,
and we know per previous episodes that you love pussy. So it's not because you think there's something wrong with that. You're just not.
I love pussy
and
I'm into vulvas. I think vulvas are beautiful and amazing. And I think that girl on girl consensual, because they're digging it, is fucking beautiful. I am like 100% proponent of all types of love and all sexual experiences. I just personally don't want to lick a pussy.
Perfect.
Just not for me. And I only figured that out because I was like put in this situation where I was like, actually, no, I don't. Yeah. I'm only doing this because I'm experimenting, and this is where my experimentation stops.
Yeah. So the Kinsey scale, hopefully I'm speaking to this correctly, but there's his numbers are that about 10% of the population is gay, and about 10% of the population is straight. And it's a scale rather than neat boxes. So 10% gay, 10% straight, and then 80% of people exist somewhere on this continuum. And so I just listened to our masturbation episode and heard myself say that I was heterosexual, and it didn't even come out of my mouth, right? I was like,
I'm hetero something.
Because I actually don't think that that's true, but I'm in a heterosexual relationship that I'm committed to, and I certainly receive all of the benefits that heterosexual people do in this country that we're going to fucking dismantle because everybody deserves the same rights and respect in their relationships. So that is a way that people identify me, but I definitely exist somewhere else in that spectrum. And I also had experiences with girls and women in college and really enjoyed them, but wasn't, I think, with a woman that I ever really connected with. In fact, there was one that I completely fell in love with this woman, and I thought, like, I was so in love with her, and I thought, this is it. I'm gonna be a lesbian. And some part of me, was like relieved, like maybe it could like scrap all of my terrible experiences with men if like it was really just that I was a lesbian all along.
I think a lot of women have felt that way.
Yeah, like maybe it was just that I was trying all the wrong stuff.
Yeah,
but it wasn't right. It just was. It never. So none of the women I was with did it ever like click with. Yeah, and so I ended up spending significantly more time with men sexually and in relationships, and am now in a heterosexual marriage. But I did a lot of really fun experimenting. And really enjoyed that. And as an adult, when I look back and think about, all of the things that I've done and was curious about and tried, I don't actually think that it's fair to say I'm heterosexual. I really appreciate women. And I'm fiercely loyal to my husband and married, so, anyway, so it's not super important to me that people like are able to identify me somehow, but it is, important to me to have a conversation about that kind of exploration. and most of my friends I know who are gay, at some point tried to explore that as well.
Absolutely.
And ended up where they kind of knew they needed to be all along. And I just definitely exist somewhere in the middle, happy about it.
Well, and I think that it's really important, that you talk about, the actual metrics when it comes to the Kinsey scale, because if we're saying that 10% of the population are gay, like they know they're gay, 100%, and 10% of the population knows, like, heterosexual, opposite sex, then that leaves 80% of the population on this scale.
Yeah.
On this sliding scale. And I think that that's a really important conversation to have, because there are probably some women who have historically been in heterosexual relationships who might have sexual feelings about, women and think that that's shameful, or that's, what's that about? And that's just about your sexuality. There's no shame in it. And you don't have to define yourself as heterosexual or homosexual. Like you exist on this scale, and you don't have to put yourself in this box.
Do you watch Jenna Marbles?
No, I don't. But my son does, and I don't think it's appropriate for kids.
It's not.
I don't know.
Some of it more so than others. She's hilarious. She is the top earning YouTuber that's a female.
This is what I hear. Yeah. Well, she got in the game early. She had the right idea.
She did. My favorite video of hers, which may have been one of the first ones that really went viral, is about girl crushes. And it talks about like her levels of girl crush. Anyway, totally worth a Google. But
I'll check it out.
It's also like an interesting exploration of the scale, because there's like level 1 girl crush, like I want to hang out with you. I think she mentions like Ellen, like I want to be friends. And then there's level 2 girl crush where it's like, I don't know if I want to like be you or but and then on to like I totally want to at least make out with you. So that's all possible. And when thinking about the scale and people I've encountered, especially growing up when people were doing a lot of exploring, I had friends who like really just couldn't see other women as attractive or not, outside of like just like looking at pictures of somebody and thinking she's pretty but not really into it, and girls who thought no, like she's beautiful, and could like really like get into the beauty of another woman, and then further than that. So there's just like this scale of what you find attractive, what you might be interested in. And I think the reason why, if 80% of us are somewhere in the middle, but most of us identify as heterosexual, is because of the conditioning that's where we're supposed to be.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think that it's anything other than social conditioning.
Yeah.
Like if we're all having these different feelings and we all exist on this scale, like that's what's normal, right? Because that's the way we were made. Like to have this, this idea that, well, we need to identify as heterosexual, that's something that was given to us. That's not something that, we were born with, or something that is inherently part of us. I can look at women and appreciate their beauty and be
obviously,
oh,
looking at me.
I mean, I look at you all the time and I'm like, Erin is a fucking queen. She is fierce and gorgeous. And I appreciate women so much. And I also change in front of all my female friends.
Same. I really appreciate your booty, by the way. It's my favorite.
Thank you. Well, the first time Erin saw my butt outside of clothing, she said, I didn't know all that was under there.
That sounds like me.
You did say that. It's like my husband, John, actually, when we first moved in together, started to have those experiences where like he saw that I would like change in front of my friends, and he was like, this is fine. Like, this is normal. Girls do this. I get it. But like, I don't feel comfortable being here when you do it. He was really like, you're naked and we've both seen you naked, but I don't want to do that together. That's not like an experience I want to have with your best friend. I think
I've been in that scenario before where I felt a little weird because the relationships are different.
Yeah, and I think that's not a matter of like sexuality or what's appropriate or what's inappropriate. I think it's relationship dynamic.
Yeah, well, and it triggers something different in his mind when he sees you undress than it does in mine. Yeah. So to have both of those things at once maybe feel a little awkward.
Coexisting, and then you kind of don't know, and then he's like, am I supposed to have a boner? Or like, I don't know what's happening here. Yeah.
If she's here, is that weird?
Yeah. So John and I have a lot of really candid conversations about sex. And as I mentioned, like, we decided really early on that it was okay to ask for anything, and it's always okay to talk about sex, and it's always okay to talk about each other's like libido and the rise and fall and different, situations that we're having and stressors and so on. One thing we really like to do, and I really initiated this because I think that it's something that can really benefit your sex life with a specific partner. It doesn't have to be a monogamous partner. It can be like any partner that you're having regular sex with, because it sort of implies intimacy on a different level and also can get you talking about what you want in the future. But every time afterwards, my favorite thing to do is ask my husband what his favorite part was. And at first he thought it was cute and hilarious. He was just like, it's hilarious that you always ask that. And I would ask it because I kind of want that, like, to me, that's like, it's like the equivalent of porn, right? It's like a way to enjoy the idea of sex without actually having it. Mm-hmm. And so I would really like to like relive. And so John calls it the recap. He's always just like, are we doing this sex recap? And sometimes it's right afterwards, and sometimes it's the next day. But I always like to ask because I like to know, I like to hear about it because it turns me on. But I also like to know, was maybe my favorite part wasn't his favorite part, and that's mm-hmm. cool. And like, what did we enjoy separately or together? Like, what was the context? The highlights? Yeah, it's like the highlight reel. It's really fun to talk about. I think a lot of people just have sex and then don't talk about their sex. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes it's kind of nice to get like a little meta about it and like talk about it.
I think that's actually a really beautiful place to wrap up, because I think one of the themes of what we talked about today that's really important for all of us is to be able to communicate, not only being able to communicate better with ourselves about what we want, but to communicate better with our partners about mm-hmm. all parts of sex. And so I think that's actually a really easy or simple, better than easy, way to start doing that is to just ask for the highlights rather than like, don't do that anymore, or here's my shame stuff. But
it's like, no pressure. It's like, it's no pressure. It's low stakes. Yeah. Right. And like anytime we're trying to sort of get more vulnerable or, practice being courageous or practicing authenticity, like these different skill sets that we're trying on. Mm-hmm. It's always easier to do them in low stakes situations than it is in high stakes situations. So it's always easier to start those conversations with, what did you like? What was your favorite? As opposed to like, you did this thing and I didn't like it. Or, just not talking
Less
about
teeth.
it at all.
Or more.
or more, everybody's got their thing. So, talking about it. So, the next time you're having sex with someone, consider asking them what their favorite part was afterwards and not being afraid to share what yours was.
I love that. Thank you for always sharing so honestly about your experiences in your life.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for just, being a queen and all that. Queen shit. Thank you for your queen shit, for just putting your queen shit out into the universe.
Same. It's lovely. Thank you guys for joining us, and please join us next time for another episode of Nasty Women Radio.